Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the NosillaCast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology podcast with an ever so slight Apple bias. Today is Sunday, August 31st, 2025, and this is show number 1060. We now know that the Apple Fall event is going to be on September 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. As usual, Steve and I will be hanging out with the NosillaCastaways in the live chat room at podfeet.com/live. It's hosted on Discord. It's free to get in. It's not any problem unless Discord decides to make you change your name 18 times like it did to Lynn. But anyway, go to podfeet.com/live on September 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time if you want to join us. Now, Steve and I won't be yapping like we are right now to the live audience. We'll only be texting, so you'll be able to listen to what Apple has to say. I hope you'll join us to complain when the games part comes on and then discuss whether we're buying the newly announced doodads. All right, let's get started with the show. We've only got 2 topics this week, but it's definitely not going to be a short episode. Over the decades that I've been writing and talking about the Mac, I've covered multiple applications that are designed to help you recoup disk space. It's so easy to accumulate files that you really don't need to keep, and many apps these days create large files in hidden directories that you might not even know about. If you have limited storage, perhaps on a laptop, maybe you need help finding big files you don't need to sync locally from your cloud storage provider. In the past, I've done reviews of these specific apps to help you gain back disk space. But today I'd like to talk about why you might want to run several of them one after another. I recently installed 4 of these disk scanning apps, and I ran them all on my 13-inch MacBook Air. Running these 4 apps sequentially helped me find a lot of space that I could recover with no adverse impact. Because their interfaces are so very different, each app found different things that I could eliminate. I'm going to walk through the apps and give you kind of an overview of how they represent your data and describe why I found each app useful in its own way. They aren't complete reviews of each app, but I get into some of the depth. I truly believe that if I only used one of these apps to scan for unnecessary files, I wouldn't regain nearly as much space. The 4 apps I ran were a relatively new entrant into this space, DiskGraph from Desirem.com. It's DESAIREM, so I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. Anyway, it's called DiskGraph, and it only costs $5.74 if you buy it direct from the developer, or $5 even in the Mac App Store. The second one is SpaceLens, and it's from MacPaw as part of the Clean My Mac Plus application at MacPaw.com. The next one is SpaceLens from MacPaw as part of Clean My Mac Plus at MacPaw.com. Clean My Mac Plus is a subscription service for $65 per year if you pay annually, but it's also available inside SetApp, which is also from MacPaw. Note that SpaceLens is not part of Clean My Mac Basic, only part of Clean My Mac Plus. The third one is an oldie but a goodie and recently updated called GrandPerspective, which is free from grandperspective.sourceforge.net. For some reason, it doesn't have an E on the end of GrandPerspective when it's at SourceForge. It's always been that way, and I never understood why. But you can also get GrandPerspective in the Mac App Store for $3 whole. OmniDiskSweeper is free from the Omni Group at omnigroup.com and is also a longtime favorite. Now, if you're a fan of Daisy Disk, please don't take its omission from this list as any kind of slight on the tool. From what I can see, it looks quite delightful, but I had to draw the line somewhere on how many tools to install to make my point. I'm still tempted to buy it, though, and I've been looking at it while I've been working on this article. It's only $10 from daisydiskapp.com, and it looks pretty nifty. Now, one word on accessibility before we start. None of the graphical apps appear to be accessible, but the final app I'll be talking about will be able to meet the needs of our voiceover user friends. Eventually. I'll explain more when we get to it. I started my disk scanning adventure with DiskGraph, mostly because it was the new shiny app I just purchased. When you first launch DiskGraph, it invites you to select a folder level of your disk to scan. I decided to have it scan just my user directory. At first, the interface seems overly simplistic, showing a simple blue circle on a white background, or kind of a grayish-white background, with a counter showing how many files have been scanned so far. In a minute or two, it had scanned well over 1 million files, and then produced a very interesting-looking circular pie chart representing all of my data. In the center, it said the total amount of data in my home directory was 690 gigabytes. Moving out from the center are concentric arcs representing types and locations of data. More than half of the first interior circle for me is a red arc, and if I hover over that segment, it tells me it's my pictures directory, which is 390 gigabytes. This is only my optimized photos, by the way. When you go from the first level to the next concentric arcs, you're drilling down into that directory. So my second arc going out is nearly all red still, and that's my photos library, but part of the arc is a series of small teal-colored arcs that don't take up nearly as much of that one big arc. Hovering over each one showed them to be folders of pictures from my 2 kids' weddings. These are huge directories, and I know I should go through and just pull out the images I want, but I've kind of never gotten around to doing that, so it's every single photograph that the photographer ever took of that wedding. Using DiskGraph, I discovered that not only do I have a 3.5 gigabyte folder from Lindsay's wedding, I also have a 3.5 gigabyte zip file of the same folder. In the first few minutes, looking at the data in this crazy circular view, I found 3.5 gigabytes I could recover. But that's not all. Steve has been working on scanning in all of the photos from our physical photo albums, and they're in a folder called Photo Album Scanned. This folder is inside Dropbox. My task in the scanning project is to put them into photos while retaining this Dropbox folder. With DiskGraph, I clicked on the concentric arcs for the scanned photos library, and it opened that folder up into a new view, allowing me to see more granularity. As I poked at this folder inside Dropbox, guess what I found? Another copy of both of my kids' wedding albums. And yep, a second copy of the zip file of Lindsay's wedding album, too. Grand total of unnecessary files in Dropbox and synced to this Mac is another 13.4 gigabytes. Add that to the 3.4 gigabytes in the first pictures folder, and the total savings by DiskGraph in just 10 minutes of looking at it was 16.8 gigabytes. Now, not all discoveries help you regain disk space. Using DiskGraph, I found yet another photos library called syndication.photos library, and it was taking up 23 gigabytes of space. The syndication library was buried in my user library, Photos Libraries, which isn't normally visible in Finder, and I'd no clue what that was. I decided to ask Perplexity AI, and it explained that it's where shared with you images and videos are managed. Any photos or videos you've ever been texted via messages will still be in here. I backed away very slowly to make sure I didn't break anything, because clearly I'm not supposed to be messing around in that directory. Now, I've been describing DiskGraph's pie chart view, but you could also switch it to tree map view. This view shows your files as differently sized boxes depending on disk space used, and they look kind of like a printed circuit board with some gray squares surrounded in some cases by wee tiny little boxes around them. To be honest, this view in DiskGraph sort of breaks my brain a little bit, and it didn't help me to be able to see where I may have wasted space, but it might mean a lot to you. Whether you favor the pie chart or tree view, you can change the color coding to mean different things. One bit of information that could be useful when deleting items is whether you've accessed them recently. With view by date modified or date created, you get a heat map where red is the most recently modified, then yellow, green, and finally blue, which identifies your oldest stuff. That nearly 4 gigabyte zip file of Lindsay's wedding is the only blue item I have, showing it hasn't been modified since 2015. Pretty sure I don't need 2 copies, or actually, well, there's 4 total, but 2 copies of that zip file from 2015. When you do find a file you're sure you don't need, if you right-click on the segment representing it, one of the options is Move to Bin, also known as the trash or deleted items. When you execute a Move to Bin, the concentric arcs do this cool animation to move the segment to the trash. I found a 400 megabyte recording from the Mac Mommy, also known as Melissa Davis. It was from 4 years ago, and it was buried in Dropbox, and I definitely didn't need this any longer. I put the animation of removing it into the show notes for your entertainment, so you can go watch that short little video. Now, I stopped hunting for disk space using DiskGraph because I wanted to give the other applications a chance to shine. Total disk space gained by DiskGraph was 17 gigabytes. Next up is Clean My Mac. I definitely wouldn't get a Clean My Mac subscription just for SpaceLens, but since I have a setup subscription already, it makes sense to see what it would find if I put it through its paces. SpaceLens is accessed from within the Clean My Mac interface with all of the fancy undulating animations they favor over at MacPaw. It's really very pretty. Like DiskGraph, you get to choose the folder level to start with. SpaceLens completed the scan on my home directory much more quickly than DiskGraph. I didn't time it, but I'd say probably around twice as fast. Upon completion, SpaceLens shows a list view on the left of the top 8 directories sorted by size, with a chevron to show other items below that. It's of note that among my top 8 directories were several hidden directories, those starting with a dot. It could see .trash, which was kind of obvious, but it can also see .olama weighing in at 2 gigabytes. Well, Olama is a large language model I downloaded 8 months ago to test running AI locally on the Mac. You may remember NosillaCast Way Steve Mattin joining me on a special tidbit episode of Programming by Stealth, where he taught us how to run these LLMs locally. In any case, I quickly learned in these experiments that 16 gigabytes of RAM on this MacBook Air did not give a good experience, so I definitely don't need to keep the LLM Olama on disk. Now, the strength of SpaceLens is that it revealed this 2 gigabyte model in a hidden directory, so it's very unlikely that I would have discovered that on my own. To the right of the list view are the same 8 folders, but now they're in bubbles by size. The view is very pretty with a gradient purple for each bubble. We already know my pictures directory, even with optimized images, is quite large, but my user-level library is close behind it at 335 gigabytes. A single tap on any of the bubbles opens the selected folder and shows a new set of bubbles by size. Most of the bubbles show their size under the title of the folder, but oddly, sometimes they just don't, and I don't know why that is. My biggest bloat contribution in my library is messages. Remember that syndication photos library I found out with DiskGraph? Well, here it is again. Now remember that if you sync your messages via iCloud, that ever-growing directory is getting synced to all of your devices. I drilled down into messages a few levels in Clean My Mac, and once you get to attachments, you can't drill down any farther. The items in here are pretty obfuscated, so you really wouldn't want to clean things up this way anyway. A better way is to open Settings on your phone, then go into General, iPhone Storage, wait for it to draw the graphs, and you'll likely see under Recommendations to review large attachments. I just checked, and I've got a 1.21 gigabyte video of Pilot Pete teaching the audience at MacStock how to fold your own toga out of a bedsheet. Now, it's not that this isn't priceless content, but I took the video, so it means it's also in my photos library for posterity, and it's only showing up here because I sent it to Pete and some other friends. This is definitely something I want to delete from that storage. Now, after you've drilled down into the bubbles, SpaceLens gives you breadcrumbs at the top of the screen, so you can bounce right back up to the highest level view and start a new drilling exploration. While SpaceLens is definitely the prettiest of the apps I tested, I didn't find myself exploring nearly as much as I did with the other applications. However, I do want to give an honorable mention to another tool in Clean My Mac, and it's under the Smart Care button. Among other utilities, it looks for what it considers junk. On my Mac, it identified what it said was 85 gigabytes worth of junk candidates. I was doubtful that I really had that much junk, but it was clearly worth investigating. Drilling into junk takes you to the Cleanup Manager with sections for system junk, mail attachments, and trash bins. I have Xcode installed on my Mac specifically to use the simulators so I can see how my web apps look on different size screens. SmartCare identified that these simulators take up more than 43 gigabytes of space. I only need to run these simulators very occasionally, and I could easily go fetch them again at any time. But a more compelling storage item that SmartCare found, and I didn't see identified with the other disk scanning apps, was an iOS device backup, and it was from when I upgraded my friend Lupe's iPhone 14 to an iPhone 16, so it was a backup of her iPhone 14 from, a year ago. I can, with a click of a button, regain 34 gigabytes of storage simply by deleting that unnecessary backup. Now, the other big contributor to what SmartCare considers junk was cache files, but I find deleting caches to be a fool's errand. Cache files are normally deleted automatically when not needed, and if you delete them yourself, they kind of tend to grow back on their own. I didn't spend much time with mail attachments either because the problem is similar to cleaning messages from outside the app. Likewise, trash bins didn't seem too interesting because you could just kind of empty them on your own. So our running total is now 17 gigabytes for DiskGraph and 34 gigabytes for Clean My Mac, and we found a total of 51 gigabytes so far. Now, I've been writing and talking about our next tool, GrandPerspective, since 2007. I found where I first talked about it in episode number 97 of the NosillaCast. That's 963 episodes ago, nearly 1,000. It's so long ago that in the same episode, I asked the audience whether anyone knew of a cross-platform podcatching app. iTunes had a podcasting by then, but they hadn't yet come out with a Windows client. Now that's way back. When I saw it had an update after all these years, I was really excited because I've always loved this application. Anyway, GrandPerspective displays your files in a grid of boxes, rather like the tree view in DiskGraph, but it's a much more intuitive interface to me. After telling it to scan my home directory, I was rewarded with a very pretty graphic of gradient-filled boxes representing file size with the sizes of the boxes. Nearly 2/3 of the window is one giant file, which to no one's surprise is the package file for my photos library. Ignoring that behemoth, my eye was drawn to a very large red square. Upon selection, across the bottom, I could see the location in my directory of a file called whisper-best.bin, and it was inside a Rogue Amoeba models directory. On the far right of the bottom, it showed me the file was 2.88 gigabytes. As we discovered using Space Lens, large language models like this take up a lot of space. In the toolbar at the top, one of the icons is Reveal, which will open the enclosing directory of the file in Finder. I'm not sure yet that I'm going to get rid of that model, but it was interesting to see where it was and how big it was, and I definitely wouldn't have found it on my own. With that giant box for photos dominating the screen, it's hard to see the other large files, but GrandPerspective has a tool to fix that problem. With any one of the other files selected, using the zoom button in the menu bar zooms in on that entire section, that directory, so it fills the window and ignores the entire photos directory. Zooming back out brings all of the boxes back. One of the more obvious areas for disk reclamation was a region of shiny rust-colored boxes that together take up a trunkload of space. When I selected one of the boxes, I could see it was a ScreenFlow file from my most recent Screencast Online project, and it was taking up around 3 gigabytes of space. If I go to the menu bar and select View, Selection Focus, move selection up, or you can use Command left bracket to do this, then the entire directory in which that file resides becomes selected. That directory of ScreenFlow files takes up 40 gigabytes. Now that's not terribly surprising to me, and I'll explain why. When I'm working in ScreenFlow, you simply cannot have the file contained in any cloud service. As the software isn't the most stable app around, and these videos are so very hard to make, I create a copy of the local file over on Dropbox every time I make a substantial amount of progress. As a result, the Dropbox folder from my latest video has 50 copies of the file, with the smallest starting at 75 megabytes when I first started, and the last copy being over 3 gigabytes. Now the real question is, why on earth is this Dropbox folder for my Screencast Online videos synced to my MacBook Air when I literally never work on ScreenFlow on this Mac? ScreenFlow isn't even licensed for this Mac. I'll be cleaning that folder out as soon as I get the hat tip that everything's dandy with my video since I've published it. But in the meantime, I'm just going to stop syncing that folder to this Mac. It makes no sense. Now, under the Window menu, there's an option to turn on the Control Panel. I have no idea why they put it under Window, and I have no idea why they call it Control Panel. I would have looked for it. In fact, I did look for it. I knew it existed, and I couldn't find it. I would have looked at it maybe under File and called it the Info window. But in any case, go under Window Control Panel. In there, you'll see 3 tabs: Info, Display, and Focus. Info gives you the top level showing your drive size and how much has been scanned. The Display tab has 3 interesting options. Show lets you choose between the default of packages and files, or you can show just files or packages and folders. By default, you can color the boxes by folder, but you can change it to creation date, file extension or type, and a handful of other methods. Now, Palette lets you change the color palette of the displayed boxes, and you can choose from a good dozen different color sets, so you're sure to find something to delight you. At the bottom of the poorly named Control Panel, you can mask the results of the scan to eliminate anything in cloud files, any hard links, or those with no version control. Masking changes the display to replace any files or folder that meet that criteria to be replaced with a big black box or maybe a gray box. I masked my scan to show no cloud files, and the resulting graphic was very interesting. Basically, it demonstrated that only a tiny fraction of the files on this Mac are not in a cloud service. All right, I had to quit playing around with this tool because I was having too much fun and see what else I could find. Once I told Control Panel to show me everything again, not masking anything, I found a 2 gigabyte MAMP zip file from 2020. Now, MAMP is an application that lets you build a web server right on your Mac. While this is a very useful tool, I definitely don't need that file around because it's so far out of date. I would build it again from scratch. Now, GrandPerspective helped me find even more AI models, including several downloaded for Mac Whisper transcription software. I decided to go to manage those in the app, but I ended up downloading even more interesting models, so I didn't actually gain any disk space. I lost some, but I'm not going to count that against GrandPerspective. Now, GrandPerspective was the third app I ran to scan my disk, so while it found some of the same silliness as the other apps, like Lindsay's wedding photo albums being replicated, and I already knew about the Dropbox files for Screencasts Online, GrandPerspective is only going to get credit for that 2 gigabyte MAMP file. All right, our running total is now 17 gigabytes for DiskGraph, 34 gigabytes for Clean My Mac, 2 gigabytes for GrandPerspective for a grand total of 53 gigabytes saved. Now, our final contender is OmniDiskSweeper, and it takes a very different approach from the other tools. It's completely text-based, which has certain advantages. It starts building a column view of your folders almost immediately while sorting the sizes of the contents in those columns as you watch. The non-graphical interface helps me find even more items to clean up that I don't see for some reason when it's graphical. One advantage of a text-based interface is it can be accessible with VoiceOver. Unfortunately, as of the time of this writing, OmniDiskSweeper is only almost accessible. And unfortunately, the part that's missing is kind of important. While it reads out the directories just fine that it found, it doesn't read out the size of those directories. Now, I had a feeling this wouldn't be all that hard to fix, and I happened to know a guy at OmniGroup. I sent him a note about the issue, and he wrote back almost immediately that he was working on an update for Tahoe and that he'd fix this accessibility problem at the same time. How cool is that? I'll definitely be watching for when that comes out. Unlike the other applications I've covered, OmniDiskSweeper doesn't let you choose which directory to scan. It scans the entire drive, unless I miss something. Anyway, that's what I found. Once it finishes scanning your drive, you can start perusing the column view window for candidates to delete. The first column on the left is the top level of your drive, with the found directories sorted in order of size, with the size showing to the left of that directory name. For example, my top level directory is users, and it told me it was around 200 gigabytes. The first column also includes all hidden directories. If you're a nerd, you'll recognize directories like private, USR, that's user, opt, bin, sbin, and more. Definitely don't go poking around in those directories if you don't know what you're doing. When I drilled down into users and then Allison, unlike the other apps, my pictures folder wasn't the largest directory. It looks like OmniDiskSweeper in this case wasn't drilling into package files. That's just fine because I would manage those photos in Power Photos or Apple Photos anyway. Since OmniDiskSweeper isn't swamped by my gigantic photos library, my attention was drawn to my user-level library. The biggest directory in there was containers, and in there I found the largest consumer of space was my clipboard manager, CopyM. It was hogging up over 8 gigabytes of space. Now, I knew why CopyM was taking up so much storage. It was my fault. In settings for the app, you can choose to have auto deletion of unstarred items, and in there you can define how many recent unstarred items to keep. I had set mine to 1,000. That's definitely overkill for how I use my clipboard manager, and I'm also a big old screenshot taker, so that explains why the app was taking up so much space. I went back and I changed it to 100. Now, using OmniDiskSweeper, I poked around in my Documents folder. I have a folder in there where I keep my files related to debugging software and other things. Remember all the high-quality time I spent with Apple trying to figure out why my M1 MacBook Pro's battery was draining when it was asleep? Well, in this debugging folder, OmniDiskSweeper found I had 4 gigabytes of files related to that work. In particular, it revealed a 3 gigabyte sysdiagnose file and another gigabyte of DMG files. They were for CopyM and Backblaze, because Apple was convinced those were causing the problem, and so I had identified these DMG files and put them in there. OmniDiskSweeper also identified 1.3 gigabytes worth of files from when I was fighting a Spotlight indexing problem back in 2022. As much as I love to hold a grudge, even I don't think this 5 gigabytes of files needs to stick around. All right, let's tally up OmniDiskSweeper's success. It had 5 gigabytes of troubleshooting files with Apple, plus, let's say, 6 of the 8 gigabytes from CopyM, and we're up to 11 gigabytes of files saved. Remember, OmniDiskSweeper came in for cleanup duty after 3 other disk scanning apps had already been through them to sweep up. Before we get to our final tally, I want to mention that Tom Schmidt pointed out to me on Mastodon something I'd forgotten, which is some of these apps can be run as root user, and if you do it that way, you can get to more of the hidden files. I'm not going to go through the commands, but if you're a nerd and know how to play in the terminal, you'll know how to launch an app as root. All right, we're coming into the home stretch here. I mentioned my Screencast Online video files in Dropbox while talking about GrandPerspective, but to be fair, they were pretty visible in most of the apps. It only occurred to me because of this disk sweeping exercise not to sync that folder. So I'm going to add it to our total winnings without giving any particular tool the credit. So our final tally is 17 gigabytes from DiskGraph, 34 gigabytes from Clean My Mac, 2 gigabytes from GrandPerspective, 11 gigabytes from OmniDiskSweeper, and 46 gigabytes worth of SCO videos in Dropbox. The grand total, 110 gigabytes of disk space saved. So the bottom line of what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that even spending, it was no more than 15 minutes with each tool, I saved a massive amount of disk space on my laptop. The fact that each app presents the information to you in a different way is why I recommend running more than one of these apps to sweep your drives. If I really spent some significant time working with these apps, I'm sure I could find a lot more to clean up. Well, everyone has different ways they like to support the show, and one of our longest time supporters through Patreon is Klaus Wolf. He decided this week to switch up how he donates to the show to an annual donation through PayPal, which actually turns out to increase his donation to the Podfeet podcast, so I'm all in favor of this switch. I'm not going to get into why that happened, but I like that he has the flexibility to donate in any way he likes. He said the only hard part is he has to remember a year from now to donate again. I think I'll put a reminder in my calendar to remind him. Anyway, if you'd like to be nifty like Klaus, head on over to podfeet.com/PayPal and make a donation that helps you show the value you get from the work we do here. I want to continue to sing the virtues of those who quietly continue to donate through Patreon with our 9-year donors, all the way back since 2016. Ready? Richard, Jonathan, John, Jonathan, Clinton, Darren, James, Tom, Brad, Alex, Robert, Ian, April, Wayne, Cian, and Martin. Thank you all for your continued support. Well, it's that time of the week again. It's time for Security Bits with Bart Bouchat's, basically everybody's favorite part of the NosillaCast. Hi, Bart.
Aww. Hello, Allison.
I remember I was afraid to put in chapters because I was afraid they'd skip everything I talk about and only listen to you. And you know what? If that's what they want to listen to, that's fine too.
Well, you're here as well. And you add a lot of value.
So you say.
Yeah.
All right, what kind of catastrophes do we have this week?
It's a mixed but small bag. It is very much August. It feels very Augusty as I looked at my folder of links. We have 2 stories I want to check back in on that we talked about previously. An easy one, we talked about Allianz Life, which is a major US insurer, having lost a lot of data that left a lot of US citizens open to mainly very well-targeted phishing. It's now a little easier to figure out if it's you, as it were. The data has been loaded to Have I Been Pwned? So if you do a search on Have I Been Pwned for your contact details, you'll know whether or not you're in that particular Allianz breach.
Alrighty. Well, that's good.
Now, the next story is one of those ones where I'm really happy that we only record twice a month, because otherwise I would have had to correct myself. But in the time between recordings, this story has gone from, yay, it's over, to, ooh, maybe not. So we sort of kind of unofficially know about the UK government attempting to force Apple to break end-to-end encryption on iCloud. Specifically, the advanced data protection feature is definitely involved. And the first bit of news to break, so it was posted on X, which means it's already limited in length. I don't think it was the full length an X post is allowed to be, and it certainly wasn't high on detail. So the US Director of National Security, Tulsi Gabbard, posted on X to say that the UK has agreed to drop its mandate for Apple to provide a backdoor that would have enabled access to protected, encrypted data of American citizens encroached on our civil liberties. That is definitely not a bad thing. But is it only the Americans that are being excluded from what the UK want to do? There's not a lot of there. The UK government...
Right, I know the US was worried about what was strange about the request from the UK, if it was to have actually existed, since we've never had proof that it did, was that it wasn't just UK citizens they wanted to spy on. They wanted to be able to see everybody's data. And the US, of course, only cares about the US. So let's worry about American citizens. But if this is, they're agreeing to drop the mandate for Apple to provide a backdoor to American data, does that mean it's open for everybody else? That's what you're saying. Okay.
Right. That's not clear. So the UK government offered no comment. They say they do not comment on operational matters. Apple offered no comment, saying they were not at liberty to say anything. So this is the total facts, and everyone, all the headlines basically screamed, "Yay, it's over!" And that lasted a few
Now,
days.
advanced data protection is still turned off in the UK, though, as a result of this thing that we don't know whether it happened.
Yeah, it is, which is a hint. And the reason I wasn't immediately jumping for joy was that it wasn't followed by Apple re-enabling advanced data protection. And that made me go,
Mm-hmm. Wait and see.
I was right.
We aren't even in trust but verify anymore. We're in doubt but verify.
Yeah. So the next shoe to drop was again from the Financial Times in London. So the only reason we know anything about this is because the Financial Times have really good sourcing within the British Home Office. And we have been relying on the Financial Times pretty much universally for this entire kerfuffle. And they're back. They have seen documents relating to this court case. Because as well as there being a law that forces the government to, or that allows the government to issue secret orders, there's also a secret court that gets to secretly hear companies arguing against the orders they can't tell us about.
Okay. Is it where is the Financial Times located? Is
London.
it in the UK or? Okay.
London, yeah.
Okay.
So that court case doesn't actually give us confirmed fact. So they found the filing, and the filing says that there is a case scheduled to take place in early 2026, and that case implies that the government want access to all data on iCloud, so it's not limited to advanced data protection. But arguably, they could always have gotten that anyway with a police order. So I'm not entirely sure if that's a red herring, if that's Apple just describing what we knew before broadly.
So I'm going to back up into the earlier part of what you've written, but I don't think you said that this court filing is Apple's appeal against the demand that we don't know whether it really happened.
That's what I was trying to describe when talking about the secret courts. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but hang on. What do you mean they could have gotten to all of that data with just a court order? That's not true. Apple doesn't just let you fish and say, I want the entire ocean of information in iCloud.
That is correct, but it's also not clear that's what the UK government are asking for. Right now, if a person who does not have advanced data encryption gets a judge to sign an order, Apple will decrypt the data because they have a key too if you don't have advanced data protection and hand it over to police. And so it's not actually clear from the second-hand reporting from the Financial Times describing what they saw in a court case of Apple describing what they say the government is asking for. Right? There's not a lot of detail here. So I don't know how much there is. Also, we don't know if this filing that the Financial Times got is now out of date. We don't know that it hasn't been retracted. There's no reason to say that Apple didn't remove their appeal because actually the whole thing is gone. We don't know. But I do like the way that Apple Insider are reporting it, and they're basically saying there is a canary in the coal mine. If Apple does not turn back on advanced data protection for UK users, and so far it has not, as you said, then this case is continuing. And so the UK's attempt, and so is the UK's attempt to gain backdoor access. So I think it's still on. I think this drama is next chapter, January 2026, assuming early means January and not February.
Okay.
So stay tuned for more non-detailed updates.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is, I don't trust anybody in this conversation.
Correct. Apple are forced to say less than they want. The US government are only interested in the US citizens for obvious reasons, and the US government are choosing to say nothing.
Well, no, Tulsi Gabbard is out
Sorry,
there
the UK.
saying...
Sorry, I said US. I meant to say
Okay.
UK.
Right. And then the
Right.
propaganda arm is talking. Okay, good. Glad you
Yeah.
clarified that. Thanks, Bart.
Yeah, me too. Right, action alerts. Apple have fixed a new zero-day flaw being exploited in targeted attacks. That's code word for this vulnerability was really valuable because no one knew it existed. It was used on a small number of very high-value targets. Now everyone knows about it because we've patched it, so patch bloody quickly because this will be reverse engineered now. You can take old code and new code and compare them and figure out what was patched. And then from there, you can reverse engineer a hack. So the
And I
moment
think an
Apple
important part
patch,
about this one is you can tell how serious it is. They patched Ventura.
yeah,
So if you're running older OSs, Sequoia, Sonoma, Ventura, and actually the iOS is 17. Looks like they got it too.
which seems to be a little bit limited because iOS is 18.6, the iPad is 18.6 and 17.7, and then the Mac
Huh.
goes back 3. So iOS is only the current one, the iPad goes back 2, and the Mac goes back 3. Whatever this
That
feature
seems
is,
odd.
well, no, whatever this feature is, it obviously started on the Mac, and it's some sort of feature that was then brought to the bigger iPad. Remember, the iPad used to have better Safari than the iPhone, and then they brought it to
Right.
the iPhone. So whatever this feature is, it used to be a Mac thing, then it became a Mac and iPad thing, and then it became an iPhone thing. Now, I don't know what it is, I just know it's patched.
Huh. Okay. That's
Interesting.
I can now I understand how that could be true. I was looking at going, oh, you must have just missed something, but no.
No.
Okay.
Software is interesting. Anyway, WhatsApp users, patch. 0-day exploited in targeted attacks. Sound awfully similar because, yes, the same kind of attack. So, for exactly the same reasons, patch quickly because now that the patch is out, people can figure out what the problem was. And then,
We should say one more time, just because you're on an older operating system doesn't mean you're more secure. It means you're less secure because these bugs don't just spawn in new OSs. They usually have been around for a while and just been found. I mean, I suppose there could be new spawned bugs,
it's yes
vulnerabilities,
and.
certainly.
It's yes
But
and.
very likely, since the vast majority of what's in an operating system has already been there, probabilistically.
Yes, and the other thing is security architectures get improved. So the design of the newer operating systems, they're more secure by design because security is more of an issue. So only a small percentage of the code is new, so your point stands. And the new stuff is usually intended to make it more secure, even if it has the danger of new bugs.
Right.
So patch. And finally, a very, very targeted little patch. I know we have some very deep in the weeds Nosilla castaways, and one of the technologies that I know we have Nosilla castaways loving is Docker, which is
Yes.
really powerful tool that's very difficult to explain, but it's really popular with developers because of how it works. And you can run it on servers, and that's not a problem, which is great because it means half the planet isn't vulnerable. Because a lot of websites are powered by Docker. A lot. But people developing websites and apps on their local machine running a local copy of Docker, beware that the Windows version had an extremely nasty bug. It has been patched. Patch.
So it's Docker that you have to patch. Docker for
Yes.
Windows?
Docker,
Okay.
Docker desktop for Windows.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Docker's cool. Docker's like little virtual machine sort of things. And you can install
More
like
efficient.
it's like a single purpose. Like
Why?
you can have a Docker for Plex, for example, on Synology. And
Yeah.
it's just a whole little package.
So, okay, I'm going to very quickly explain why it's cool because our show notes are really barren. So if you had, let's say you need to do two things in your Synology. You could have two virtual machines to do two things. If you do it with Docker, there is one virtual copy of Linux shared by both Dockers. So the only bit that's in the Docker container is the bit that's unique. So if you have one
Really?
Docker or 1,000 Dockers, they share the Linux kernel. That's why they're so efficient.
That I didn't know. So the more you Docker, the more you save.
Yes. It's really clever technology.
Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I love it. Yeah. Don't use it, but I love it. It's conceptually amazing. Right.
You should be playing with it on your Synology, Bart. It's super
In all
fun.
of my free time. Actually, no, sorry, I am using it. And you're dead right. Actually, that's how my Synology does stuff. I just use it by pushing a button instead of by looking at it.
That's the other best part is button. Got another one.
It's actually JSON files all the way down. It's just loads and loads of JSON config files, but yeah. Okay, worthy warnings then. I have two examples. The story themselves aren't really the news. They illustrate the bigger picture that I think is the news. So the first thing is you gave us an excellent description of all of the reasons people are very interested in the cutting edge concept of agentic AI. That is AI that can do things as well as say things. That is quite a difference, right? Answer a question versus make a thing in reality happen. And there's a lot of potential usefulness in the ability to make things happen. But it's cutting edge and new. So be very careful what you trust an agentic AI with. If you give it the power to turn on and off your lights, the worst thing that can happen is you end up in the dark. If you give it the power to spend your money, the worst thing that can happen is you have no money.
Little different.
Little
just
different.
Sitting in the dark.
So with that context, a real message is, by all means, experiment with this cool stuff. But bear in mind that anything you give an agentic AI the power to do, it can do really wrong. So don't give it the power to do things that would be bad. Right. Let it help you, but
there's
don't
an example there's an example in the show notes.
There is. Perplexity's Comet AI browser tricked into buying fake items on Amazon. Dear AI, please go buy me toilet paper. And it bought, well, it wasn't toilet paper, but dear Comet AI browser that can do things for me online without me having to do it myself, go buy me a whatever. And it just bought a bunch of counterfeit nonsense that wasn't real. Because the AI was too dumb to realize it was a scam.
So is that really on the agentic AI?
Well, right, this is my point, right? The agentic AI is going to try to do what you ask it to do, but it's not perfect. So if you ask it to buy things, I would say the bug is on you. Why did you ask the AI to spend your money? Because it could be tricked, and was.
Okay.
See what I mean?
Because, I mean, you very likely could have been tricked by it as well.
Possibly, but outsourcing it to AI won't make things better. Easier, but is that better?
Yeah.
Like I say, it's a warning, not a... I don't think there's any scandal here. There's no big auga here, but I think it's just a really good illustration of the broader concept. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similarly, broader concept, we've talked a few times, there's a new trend, very popular now on the Windows side. They call it click fix, where either an ad or an answer on a forum or Stack Overflow or an issue on GitHub, some sort of answer on the internet, offers help to a common problem that involves copying and pasting something into the run dialog on Windows or the address bar in the Explorer app or the File Explorer app on Windows, which it turns out can run commands, or into a run dialog, which really can run commands. And then we had mentioned that in theory, the Mac was being looked at by some malware. Yeah, it is, and it's working. So there are...
Yay!
Yeah. So do not paste things into boxes that you don't understand. It's just bad.
So where does the click fix work in macOS? What's the equivalent of the run dialog box or...
You can probably abuse Quick Look. You can definitely abuse terminals, which is what this particular example abused. Open the terminal and type this.
Oh,
Right. It's not
yeah.
very sophisticated yet. I mean, the one with the Windows File Explorer I wouldn't have done it because I don't paste into boxes and hit enter. But I wouldn't have immediately set off my alarm bells in the way that open the command prompt on Windows would have.
Right.
So that one is, to me, sophisticated. Open the terminal is not sophisticated, but we know it succeeds because users were tricked. The headline is that users were tricked into installing a specific info stealer by telling Mac users to paste into the terminal.
I can see if you don't know what the terminal is, but you'd also have to be somebody going to a site that suggested those things that would be, I don't know.
But they're gaming search. So the gaming search. So common piece of tech, common problem, promise to fix that is. So they're just looking on the web for things people are searching for help on and offering fake help. Probably with a chatbot generating the lure. Right. Write me a convincing email telling people to do something to fix this problem. Because the legitimate chatbots have guardrails, but there are open source LLMs and they may not be as advanced as GPT-5, but they're pretty darn advanced. Or if you go to the Hugging Face and download one of the open source models, it can do a lot and you can turn off all the guardrails if you're a malicious person and get the LLM to write you very convincing English to do anything unscrupulous you'd like.
I'm still caught a little bit on picturing an unsophisticated user being able to find the terminal to
it'll help them. It'll help them. It'll tell them to hit the option or the command space, type TREM and hit enter. It will really help them. Very helpful.
Yeah, I don't picture that one. The important thing of what you said is they're not sophisticated yet.
Yet. Yes.
Okay,
the last worthy warning does not bring me any joy whatsoever. So in America, there are 3 big credit reporting agencies. Experian was very famously utterly breached a few years ago, and that was a privacy catastrophe. Well, now it's 2 for 3. I think the smallest of the 3 is TransUnion, so maybe that's a silver lining. But yes, 4.4 million people have been compromised via TransUnion. And I am very cranky, just as I was with Experian. TransUnion are being equally as circumspect about what happened and what it means. The data is being described with one word: limited. What did they steal? Limited personal data, not including credit reports, apparently.
Okay.
I don't trust them as far as I could throw them. That is all we know.
So one of the things I think you told us about a long time ago, and I'm going to put it into the show notes, is an episode of Planet Money, episode number 798, entitled Bad Credit Bureau, and it explains where these credit reporting agencies came from, the genesis of them. Because I think most people, including me, thought they were like an official, anointed group of companies that provide this service to us, and it is the furthest from that. They're just made up. They just took this on their own, but it goes all the way back to like a farmer trading eggs in the beginning of the plot, like they do. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that Planet Money article.
Yes, it is fantastic. If people are thinking, why do I feel like there is even more data breaches than normal in recent weeks? You're not imagining it. Yes, the background is more data breaches now than a decade ago, but the last 6 weeks or so have been abnormal, and now we know why. There are certain Salesforce integrations which have a bug. So some companies that outsource customer relations using Salesforce through a particular interconnection mechanism were vulnerable to a so-called supply chain attack. So these large companies were using Salesforce in a particular way, and that's why they all got breached at once.
Oh. Oh, that's lovely.
It took a while for the dots to be joined on this, but this actually also joins the dot to our very first story because Allianz were also compromised in this way.
Oh, interesting. The same one.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Because
lots
of
and lots of
Salesforce?
dots are being joined through Salesforce.
Hmm.
Right.
Yay.
Notable news. We start bad, then we pivot. Well, then we pivot to, I don't know, then we pivot to good. So let's start bad. Again, in the UK, again in a UK court, but this time a public one with actual records and things. So this is like fact, where we can see things. So a filing has appeared in the Central London Employment Tribunal. Again, the Financial Times are telling us about it, but this one isn't secret. A former Meta employee who was a product manager is alleging that the company basically, what they did was they hacked around Apple's privacy rule. So Apple, if you don't agree to be tracked, the built-in tracking mechanism within iOS is not available. So what Facebook
Right.
did was, rather than accept the user's preference not to be tracked, they went, what the hey, let's see if we can figure out some sort of a way to connect the dots anyway and find other pieces of random metadata to connect together and to act as unblockable tracking cookies. And let's do that because that's not unethical at all.
So complying with the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law?
To the point that I would say they're not even complying with the letter, because I'm pretty sure Apple's developer agreement says you're not allowed to disobey an express expression by the user asking you not to track them. I'm pretty sure the developer
Okay.
agreement says you're not allowed to just ignore the user.
Okay.
The other thing, which is not relevant to us, but I think is interesting, is apparently they've also been fudging the numbers. So what they've been telling their investors is a bit of a porky pie. But
You mean
we're
that
not
they
a
have more
financial
data than
podcast.
they really do?
No, that they have fewer ad sales.
Oh, but so they have more ad sales than they're admitting?
No, they're lying to investors. The accusation is they're telling investors the advertising industry hasn't collapsed like everyone thought it would. But actually, according to this leaker, it has collapsed a lot more than they're letting on, which is,
Okay.
if true, securities fraud. If true.
Couldn't happen to a better company.
Yeah.
You know, what's funny is in today's world, it's hard to get enraged about this. You know, there's so much to be enraged by.
Yeah, there's a saying, oh, that's just a dog bites man story. It's like, oh, Meta are doing something unethical with our data. Huh.
Go figure.
It's a day ending in Y. Okay, so the next story is one of those ones that's a bit of a Rorschach test, because you can look at the same facts in very different ways. And you came across one headline that was "Sky is falling. This is a disaster."
Whole story, not just a headline, but a whole story.
Exactly, yes, a spin.
Description.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I came across one that was fairly sedate and was like, yeah, it's a thing. And I got so confused, I actually had to go to the raw source and read the actual letter that the Federal Trade Commission chairman actually wrote to a whole bunch of American companies. And
Tech companies.
so the Federal Trade Commission's job in life is to verify that companies aren't misleading customers, because you as the customer have rights. And one of those rights is that if a company makes a promise, it has to be real. And so the main thrust of the letter is that if you promise end-to-end encryption and a foreign government tells you to put in a secret backdoor, you can't do it secretly. What you promise must match what you deliver under Article 5 of the Federal Trade Act.
So wait a minute, you can't do it secretly? You could do it publicly, even though it was the opposite of what you said?
No, but you'd have to update what you said.
Got
So
it.
you
Okay.
have what you
Okay, so
promise
this is-
must match what you deliver.
So this sounds like a reaction to what the UK did.
Yes, it does. Now,
And
the
that sounds like a
letter
good
is.
thing at this
I
point.
certainly think so. I think it's really
Okay.
good to tell all American companies that secret court orders in foreign countries, don't be tempted to comply, we'll sue you. I think that's a good thing. The letter is 2 pages, and I would say 1 3/4 pages are dedicated to this point, which I agree with. The other quarter is not. It is First Amendment, which has nothing to do with the Federal Trade Commission, and the FTC chairman has nothing to do with the First Amendment. That's not his job. He doesn't get to do anything with it. But it just makes a bunch of token languages about how amazing the First Amendment is and how the Trump administration will look down very poorly on companies that don't uphold the spirit of the First Amendment. That's
What
it.
I read in the article, tell me if this was in the letter, because I didn't read the original article or the original letter. The article, which originally came from the Italian Wired, not U.S. Wired, it was translated, said that it was saying that everybody is really angry about the fact that Americans are being censored on social media, and
That
that this is
description.
going to protect us by this law, this thing the FTC wrote, this snarky letter the FTC wrote is what's going to protect our First Amendment rights to not be censored.
The letter isn't snarky. The letter is very flat in
my
tone.
words.
Leaving that aside.
My words,
No, I know,
nobody
they
else's.
say,
Okay.
Yeah. Well, no, the Italian article did say that it was a scathing letter, that the word they used was scathing. The letter I read was not scathing. Sorry, that's just, I can't apply that word to the letter. So if you take 75% of the letter and throw it away, and you take the remaining 25% and you rephrase it to be as, what's the word I'm looking for? Inflammatory as possible. So not the actual text of the letter, but paraphrase it to be as, read between every line and reword it to be as shouty as possible, then that headline matches. So you can infer what they said by extrapolating from the content of the letter. But the letter itself says very little. It does, in one sentence, mention examples of the kinds of laws that the Trump administration don't like in foreign countries, and it includes the Digital Services Act, and the UK equivalent that's coming into force in the next couple of months. But
I thought it was the DMA. I thought it was, the DMA is what was referred to in the, in fact, the title of the Wired article was the FTC warns big tech companies not to apply the Digital Services Act. Okay, sorry.
I always mix them up, and both of them should be on everyone's radar, or neither of them should be on everyone's radar. They're so related to each other, and they came in on the same day. They are, as far as I'm concerned, the same thing, but the letter only mentions one.
Okay. And so what did the letter say about the Digital Services Act?
It gave an example. It was giving examples of the fact that there is increasing international pressure on US companies, for example, the European Union, and that companies should be very careful when balancing their reactions to those government demands with the US Constitution. And they should be careful not to sacrifice the rights of Americans.
Okay.
That's a description of the reality that Tim Cook faces every day. He's trying to balance all of these things. Like, the letter was so FTC chairman-ish. Also, my pet theory, and this is me editorializing, right? I am now no longer saying what the letter said. I'm saying that if I read between the lines, what I read is, I'm sending a letter and I want to get a pat on my head from my boss. So if I throw in this one paragraph that I can then send in a tweet, he'll like me and I'll do well. To me, this was like a little token, distract Trump for 5 minutes, is what I read. But it's so not the point. This letter is...
The point is good.
Yeah, this letter is an attack on the secret UK order. Like, vocally against breaking iCloud encryption. That's what this is about, in my opinion.
Okay, perfect. I'm glad you kept digging at this. And you did all this in like the last hour before we were recording, where I threw this at you, and you're like, well, "Wait a minute, that's the opposite of what I read. What's going on here?" And then you kept digging and got to the source. Thank you for doing the research.
No, you're welcome. Basically, whenever I get I always do this. If every take on a story agrees, it's like I will trust that I'm not being lied to. But as soon as two trustworthy sources, and Wired is trustworthy, and who did I link to? Apple Insider is trustworthy, they disagreed. And I was like, okay, I have to read the source. I have to read the PDF. I have to read the actual letter because I can't trust either source now. I'm glad I did.
Right.
Also,
Well,
I did open it. If I'd opened it and the scroll bar had been tiny, I'm not entirely sure I would have. But it was 2 pages. I was going to read 2 pages.
Oh, you're saying if it was too small, you wouldn't have?
The scroll bar
tiny,
was
meaning
tiny.
It was long. Yeah. I use that scroll bar all the time and go, nope.
It's one of the best things about Apple's operating systems, right? Because for years on Windows, the scroll bar was a fixed size. And so you'd move it from top to bottom and the document would move one line. But the scroll bar was always the same size, whereas Apple's scroll bar is proportional. And you can just look at it and go, ooh, lot of work here. Right. Last story, we flipped into good news territory. Google to verify all Android devs to protect users from malware. This is Google taking the tiniest of steps towards being more Apple-like in a very good way. So the headline it kind of buries the lead here. This covers all apps, even sideloaded apps. But it doesn't do any scanning of the app, so it's not like Apple's notarization service, which checks for known malware and ties a verified identity to an app. So every app you get for an iOS device, whether it's from the App Store or from a corporate portal where you can have private apps within your company, they're all tied to a proven identity. You have to prove your identity to become an Apple developer to be able to submit an app that will run on any iPhone.
So is this essentially they just have to be signed developers?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
So the only
and Apple's been doing that for a long time.
Always. iOS has always done that. And Apple have been doing it.
But on macOS, you can override it if you want to.
Yes. So on the macOS, you have 3 levels. Wild West, which is how Android was until this change.
And macOS was.
And macOS was. Verified, which used to only mean that person over there definitely wrote this app. If it's malware, blame them. But a few versions of macOS ago, they also added, and we've scanned it for really obvious malware and it doesn't have any of that. That's why they called it notarization instead of just digital signatures. So Google are not doing that second step. And then the third step is it's in our App Store. We've given it every single kind of verification, checked it against all of these rules here, including all the ones people find controversial and that they're taking us to court over. Here's a walled garden. How about you play?
So sounds like Google's still a step behind in that it could still catch up and add that extra layer that at least search for obvious malware.
It could, yes. But for now, moving to a world where you can have apps that will run that you literally can never tie to an identity makes the work of law enforcement after malware more difficult. This at least makes it easier to blame people when things go wrong. It's definitely a good thing. Also, getting a verified identity is work. Right? It's effort to prove your identity. It's a very effective way to stop malicious actors from just releasing apps on a whim. Now, the reason I know this for a fact is because under the Digital Markets Act, or was it Digital Services? One of the two. Every developer in Europe has to have a verified identity. So Google enforced this on all other European developers for the Play Store in February. And with my work hat on, I had to experience the process of verifying an identity.
Oh
my
did that
God,
too.
I want my time back.
So it's useful, but maybe just that friction though is enough to be what you need to make sure somebody, legit folks are working on it.
Yes. So I think it's a good thing. basically. That's why it's in the good news section at the end. But I wanted to put some context on it in case people think, oh, Google have become the same as Apple. No, and that's kind of Google's thing, right? They don't offer a walled garden. They offer free and open. Well, even free and open now has a baseline, which is, well, actually not fully open and in a good way.
Cool.
Right. And then we're straight to palate cleansers because it's August and there's just very little happening in the world. So I have two. I have a game, an educational game. One of the things I once did very foolishly was attempt to write my own code to check whether or not something is a valid email address. Because naively, I thought letters, maybe dots, maybe numbers, followed by an @ symbol, followed by letters, dots, and numbers. That's it, right? Oh, heck no. And as I started to read more and more and more and more and more, my code went from 4 lines, 8 lines, 16 lines, 32 lines. And I was like, and I'm done. I am not solving this problem. Like time zones, this is not code I am going to write. e-mail.wtf is a little game where it asks you a very simple question. Is this a valid email address or not? And then it explains why. You will be
Unfortunately,
shocked.
that website is not working.
Oh,
Can't connect to server. https://e-mail.wtf.
it was up earlier.
I wonder if that's a...
It's up for me right now. I just clicked on the link in the show notes and it opened.
I just clicked on the link in the show notes and it says you can't go there.
I have no explanation for that fact.
Can you paste the, we're going to do this because we have time, paste it into Telegram to me just as you see it functioning, in case there's something weird about the way it's coming through the markdown and such. Let me see if I can do it.
Your Telegram, little blue icon.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
now that's showing the preview.
Yeah.
Nope. Doesn't like that. Let me try Firefox. Because we need to know. This is important.
Oh,
this
vital.
fun little game. So you said that this fun little game is going to show us, unable to connect. Wonder if it's blocked in the US? That would be odd. Firefox cannot establish a connection to the server at e-mail.wtf.
I don't
understand.
WTF
is blocked. Like I've got some...
A lot of stuff. Listeners, you may or may not be able to open this email. It was Adam Engst who recommended it, so it works in at least some of America.
Or did it one time? So did he talk about it on Tidbits?
Yes. And John Gruber linked to it, and a bunch of Nosilla castaways linked to it in the Podfeet Slack, podfeet.com/Slack, and no one in the Slack complained it didn't work.
Maybe it's
or was it on Mastodon?
Wait.
No, it was in the Slack. It was definitely in the Slack. Because I posted in the Slack saying, that was my pick. How? And then someone posted it and delete me. I was like, damn it, I wanted that to be a surprise.
e-mail. Come on. e-mail.wtf site : tid / no, is it site : tidbits.com. Oh, I hope that works in... Yeah, okay, so now I'm going to Adam Engst's article. Start quiz. Nope. Can't get to it.
I don't know.
Very curious. All right, well, we'll find out from the audience whether it worked for them.
Yeah, curious now. Meanwhile, if you can't get to the quiz, I can recommend a video.
Okay.
This one it came to me through John Gruber, but it's been doing the rounds. This is a documentary on Nebula, but the link I have goes to John Gruber's page, which gets you a link that lets you have this video as your one free video on Nebula. Or if you're signed up to Nebula, you can just watch it, obviously. This video explains in amazing detail, using 3D scans of Apple's teeny tiny AirPods, all the technology that's crammed in there. And it compares and contrasts the official ones with knockoffs. And it explains how the knockoffs are different and what effect that has. including the tightness and the perfection of the shape of the layers of the battery. And how if you don't have the battery perfectly layered, it will be less efficient as a battery, produce more heat, and be more likely to catch fire.
Wow.
And it's in
That's
your ear.
cool. The only problem I have with it is they spelled AirPod wrong. The P isn't capitalized properly, but
Oh,
we'll
that would
allow
annoy
it.
me.
I almost corrected it in the show notes, but that's the way it's written at nebula.tv. So we'll still allow it. That sounds cool.
Yeah, I watched
Definitely go
all of
watch
it
that.
and I just hoovered it up. It was amazing.
All right, cool. Well, that was a light session. We still managed to milk it for 43 minutes, but
Well,
when we have time, we kind of stretch out,
Well, I like to be guided by you, and the show notes are like, yeah, not a lot here, Alison. If you're in the mood for a short show, okay. And if you're in the mood for a big long chat, no problem.
That's great. All right, well, I guess we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
In 2 weeks' time, when it will be September, so maybe we'll have some more news. But regardless, this bottom line is always the same. Remember to stay patched, so you stay secure.
When Bart and I stopped recording, I sent a message to Adam Angst about that cool email quiz thing that he'd posted about, and Bart was saying he could get to and I couldn't get to. Well, Adam said he'd heard a few other people saying they couldn't get to it either, but he hadn't been able to find a pattern to it. He suggested I try running a trace route at the terminal to the website. Surprisingly, the trace route went to my router and abruptly returned right back to the system prompt. That meant my router was stopping that website. I poked around a bit in the network settings of my Eero router software, and under network controls, I had advanced security toggled on. That toggle says prevent access to sites that host malicious content or viruses, botnets, phishing sites, and more. Well, I toggled it off, and then I was able to play the email game. I'm glad we got that important problem resolved, and I turned the toggle back on. Well, now that's going to wind us up for this week. Did you know you can email me at allison@podfeed.com anytime you like? If you have a question or suggestion, just send it on over. Remember, everything good starts with podfeed.com. You can follow me on Mastodon at podfeed.com/Mastodon, like Tom Schmidt, and help me out with the show. If you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, you can go to podfeed.com/YouTube. If you want to join in the conversation, you can join our Slack community at podfeed.com/Slack, and there you can talk to me and all the other lovely NosillaCastaways. You can support the show at podfeed.com/Patreon or with a one-time donation at podfeed.com/donate with Apple Pay or any credit card. Or you can be like Klaus and switch over to podfeed.com/PayPal and do annual donations. And if you want to join in the fun of the live show, head on over to podfeed.com/live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic NosillaCastaways. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.